Good afternoon, fellow Plex server owners. Today we're going to try to help Joseph decide if he should replace his Synology DS223j 2-bay NAS with a DS224 Plus to gain the iGPU that's in its Celeron processor. Now, it's only a 9th gen Celeron processor, just like my DS1520 NAS that I've done other videos on. But I want to point out some things to Joseph before he pulls the trigger on a new purchase to make sure he's getting all that he can out of his current NAS. He's having some streaming issues with H265 videos, and the old adage that Plex will run on a potato as a server is equally true today as it's ever been. So if the client device is 100% compatible with your media on your server, and you have, sorry about that, and you have the available bandwidth between the two, a basic potato-like Plex server should be capable of serving up even high bitrate 4K content to a 100% compliant client device for Plex. So that's what we're going to talk about in this tab here. If you go to Plex.tv to the download section and you click on the app and devices, it's going to come up by default with your operating system on the system you're using. But if you click into it, you'll see that there is both a Plex desktop and a Plex HTPC client app for each operating system, Linux, Windows, or Mac. I'm using the Linux version of both, and they're installed as flat packs from the FlatHub store, which are kind of like little containerized versions of the app. Not quite the same as a Docker container, but it's a sandboxed system so that one app running in one FlatHub container can't pull down another app if it crashes. So this is the player app, which is the same exact interface as the web app. And then this is the HTPC client app, and it can be run full screen and not windowed. And this looks just like any other client app with a current GUI of Plex on a Apple TV, on a Roku, on an Android TV, on a Fire Stick. It's all the same GUI. So, what else do we have to show before we run our test? So I have some public domain media on my older 1019 Plus Synology NAS, which has less of an iGPU in it than the 9th gen Celeron in the NASs we're discussing, the 224 Plus or my 1524 Plus. I can get away with showing these videos on YouTube without a copyright strike because they're public domain. And there's only a few movies in this collection just to test with. So like this movie, The Hitchhiker, I have a low bitrate H265 version, and I have a higher bitrated remastered H265 version, along with a 4K copy that's, I think, is like 30 megabits per second for the bit rate, and that's also H265. The Big Buck Bunny, I have actually an 8K version, but that's H265 too. I don't know if I have a lot of H264 media. Okay, so I've got a couple copies of this movie. Let's see what I have. I do have a low bitrate H265 of this movie. Those are both H264. This one's an AVC, which some client apps will not like. And that's an MPEG. So what we'll actually test with is the 4K version of this movie. So let's get set up here. I am already in the activity window of the dashboard for this server. Oh, and before, I don't need to show it. This is using an iGPU that's labeled HD Graphics 500. So it's not as good as the UHD Graphics 600 iGPU in the DS224 Plus NAS. Alright, so let me resume this title.
Never mind the change. Let's get out of here.
So without any transcoding, we can see it starts up with some stuttering, which is not cool. But the web app is not a good client app. So let's bring in the HTPC client app, which is all keyboard driven. And if you've ever used Kodi with a keyboard, it's the same keyboard controls. Alright, you see how fast that started up. And we don't have any stuttering. Let's take a look. You do see that the audio in the web app under Google Chrome has been forced into a transcode. In the HTPC client app for Linux, the audio is a direct play. So, on an even worse host device that doesn't have a lot of CPU power, just having the audio transcode in a web browser might make the stream buffer. But under a better processor, it's still buffering as a 4K video that is listed as 21 megabits per second for the bitrate in the Chrome and 25 in the other. So let's go back to the Chrome browser and let's force this into a transcode.
Give me the map.
Alright, so I picked 2 megabits per second for 720p. And we're waiting. This may actually smooth out the buffering. So now if we go back, we see that the transcode is happening through hardware based on the HW notation, which does mean you need to buy a Plex pass in order to enable this feature on supported GPUs or iGPUs. And suddenly it's not transcoding. I'm sorry, suddenly it's not buffering. Because we've also brought the bit rate down to 2 megabits per second. So now let's bring in the HTPC client app again. We'll start the video and force that into a transcode. And we'll pick the same level. While it wasn't instantaneous, it was pretty close. And just like the original version playing, there's no buffering in the transcoded version. So this is just to prove that the client app and the available bandwidth makes a lot of difference. So if you're on an older router from your ISP that may not have a 5 gigahertz channel for Wi-Fi, or you're using a really old Roku device that was never designed to connect to the 5 gigahertz side of a Wi-Fi router, or you've got a TV and you've plugged in a Ethernet cable while not realizing that no TV manufacturer has added a gig Ethernet port. They're all locked at 100 megabits per second as a maximum. You may not have the best bandwidth for your client device. And if you're using the Chrome app or a Firefox browser to view Plex, you're just hurting yourself by using those poor Plex client infrastructures. You really want to switch to, for a computer or a laptop, you really want to switch to the HTPC client app for your operating system. And even if you just want to continue using the same interface, switch to the Plex desktop app for your operating system, because this will play it equally too. This has got the same engine in it as the HTPC client app. So sometimes if you're not really knowledgeable on the local networking side, you just need to make some adjustments. Is your TV and its device too far away from your router to connect nicely to the 5.2 gigahertz channel? It might be worth moving the modem and router someplace more centrally located, or having a mesh system. I swear by the TP-Link Deco systems. I use a pair of X60 Deco units. They're both identical. I have one, well, my house runs east to west, so I have the primary Deco in the basement, maybe about 10 feet from the eastern basement wall, and that feeds my TP-Link gig switch in the basement, and that feeds all my devices down there. But I have a hard line running up to the living room wall, and the living room is on the western side of my house, and even though it's the interior wall, it kind of gets that second Deco unit towards the other end of the house than where the basement one is placed. And it's only a 1,100 square foot ranch home, but that gives me great coverage outside at each ends of my property, the eastern or the western edge. It's not a lot of land, but I can stay connected to my 5 gigahertz side of my Wi-Fi router any place in my yard, simply by choosing the positioning of both mesh routers inside. So local bandwidth is always something to look at, but you can take a laptop and connect to the 5 gigahertz side of the router right next to it and use the HTPC client app to troubleshoot with, to see if you actually need better Plex hardware. So I'm not a professional YouTuber. I just make videos to help other Plex server users out in the different support groups on Facebook. And what you see is what you get. I don't really script any videos. I might jot a few ideas down on paper, and then I wing a video just like I've done this one. But this is how I would troubleshoot the original server before spending money on a newer one, even though I think the processor in the newer NAS for Joseph is more suited to a Plex server. And this is what I want to show before I close. So I'm actually in the settings. Here are all 3 of my servers. This is my main one running on the 11th gen Intel NUC, and it's an i5 with the Iris Xe graphics iGPU. Wonderful hardware. And then this is my first Synology NAS, which really now is just my backup NAS with this test install of Plex on it. And I have 2 test installs of Plex on my DS224, where my Plex media currently resides. I can spin up a container in Docker, then shut it down and spin up this test container as a package. So I really have 4 servers, but you can only see 3 at a time. If we go to the transcoder settings for this older Synology NAS server, you'll see that hardware transcoding is taking place on that HD Graphics 500 iGPU in that older Celeron NAS. If we switch to the DS224, you'll see it's using the UHD Graphics 600 iGPU from the Gemini Lake family, which would be the exact same on the DS224 Plus or the DS423 Plus. Same exact Celeron CPU with the same exact iGPU. And if I go to my real server, This is a wonderful processor for doing everything for Plex, and the iGPU is fantastic. It's a little Plex rocket ship, but Joseph knows he doesn't need a little rocket ship for his home use. Alright, thanks for watching, and Joseph, I hope this was informative to you. Happy Plexing.